Is it picking? It is picking me up. Welcome, welcome. We're glad you're here. We're glad that Michael Kleber Diggs is back again. I think I've bugged all of you about signing in the back, and you're all got the deal down, so you all did it before I bugged you. Anyway, thank you for being here. Thank you for signing in. And Bill and Michael, you're on.
Good morning. Happy to be back introducing Michael again. And again, I'll read from his bio and then just say a couple words about. So my own observations and appreciations about Michael. Michael Kleber Diggs is a poet, essayist, literary critic, and arts educator. His debut poetry collection, Worldly Things, from Milkweed Editions, won the Max Rivto Poetry Prize and is a finalist for the 2022 Minnesota Book Awards. Hey! His essay on the complex flavors of Black joy is included in the anthology There's a Revolution Outside, My Love, Letters from a Crisis, edited by Tracy K. Smith. Another essay, There Was a Tremendous Softness, is forthcoming in a Darker Wilderness, an anthology of Black nature writing. Among other places, Michael's writing has appeared in, or is forthcoming in Concision, Spillway, Great River Review, Waterstone Review, and on and on. Michael's work is widely published. Michael is a past fellow with the Givens Foundation for African American Literature, a past winner of the Loft Mentor Series in Poetry, and the former poet laureate of Anoka County Libraries. Since 2016, Michael has been an instructor with the Minnesota Prison Writing Workshop, where I first met him. He also teaches creative writing in Augsburg University's low-res MFA program and at St. Paul Conservatory for Performing Artists. His work has been nominated for a Pushcart Prize, Best of the Net, and has been supported by Minnesota State Arts Board, the Jerome Foundation, and Metropolitan Regional Arts Council. Michael is married to his wife Karen, who's a horticulturist, and they have a daughter who is currently studying dance performance at SUNY Purchase. I'll just kind of reiterate something I said last week, which is that Michael is a gift to our community because he is somebody who stands in the gap, and he is a voice, especially with racial issues, willing to look at things with eyes wide open and with his heart wide open. And he engages all sides with clarity and compassion, and so we're very fortunate to have him. Welcome, Michael Kleber Diggs.
It's a pleasure to be here, and Bill, thank you so much for that very kind introduction. I still feel a little weird that people gather to hear me share ideas. And I think, Bill, people sometimes gather to share ideas on social media, but when I arrive somewhere, I always think, oh, no one's gonna come. No one's gonna be there. It means a lot to me that you're here as well. What I wanted to talk about kept shifting over the days since I was here last. And this is what I settled on. At the end of my junior year of high school, I was elected student body president. I talked about that a little bit. I was on the way to school at the beginning of the next year, and I got stopped by the police. That's what I shared the last time I was here. But at the end of my junior year of high school, I had this really, let's say, useful summer. I had been invited to a football camp. There was an invitation-only football camp, and I went there. This is going to sound like modesty, and it isn't. I was the worst one. I was the worst player at the camp, and it was the beginning of a lesson that I kind of learned in my high school football team. I played linebacker, at this invitation-only football camp. I walked into the room where the other linebackers were, and I'm like, I'm in the wrong room. And I was. It was the room for linebackers. Everyone was taller and heavier, faster, stronger, quicker, better instincts. And by size, I maybe could have gone to the room where the safeties were, but the imbalance on speed and everything else was quite a bit greater in that room. So I had no place. And I can say that during that week, getting banged about and learning technique, I got better. And in my senior year of high school, I was better. But I also knew when I played my last football game in high school that was my last, like I knew. Maybe I could have gone to a small college and found a role, but that was a hard lesson at the time. I also, that same summer, went to music camp. And it wasn't an invitation-only music camp, but it was a music camp for high school students who were pretty serious about music. This is not modesty, this is fact. I was last chair, and the person sitting next to me was quite a bit better than I was. I couldn't even imagine the person a few rows up and how good they were. And I thought I was a pretty good cellist, and then I got that context. But I was a pretty good politician. I was junior class president and then student body president. And when I left high school, as I was thinking about college, actually, I wanted to go to Georgetown and to be in Washington, D.C. And my mom, in her infinite wisdom, let me manage my own college application process. And I looked up the day after applications were due to Georgetown by the mail. There's no email hustling or online hustling. And I scrambled together an application and sent it anyway, thinking maybe they would look at it. And I got the kindest note back, saying essentially that they get so many applications from people who can turn them in on time that they've made a decision to devote their time and energy there. It does kind of indicate something about the strength of your intentions if you can't meet the deadline. When I was at Kansas, there was a program to go to Washington, D.C. for 1 year, for one semester, rather. And you could take classes at either George Washington or at Georgetown. And I got in as a special student at Georgetown with the plan of checking it out, doing well, and then transferring there. I arrived early in January in 1987, and I took a job in the office of the newly elected senator from Nevada, Harry Reid. And I got there before he did. And my first job, which was assigned to me by his legislative director, a woman named Melanie Beller, who was a Kansas grad, and that's how I got the job, was to set up the file cabinets. And I did that for a few days, and then the senator came, and I got to meet him for the first time. I have dozens of Harry Reid stories. I'll just tell you a couple. Took a nap every day. Really not great with the telephone. So his habit would be to call, say what he wanted to say, and then hang up. So if he called me, which maybe happened 2 or 3 times, I would say hello, and he would say, Michael, do this, do this, do this, and then hang up. I'm like, pencil. He just didn't seem to know how phone etiquette worked. He also, well, I'll just tell you, he asked me to write a letter back to one of his college roommates who wrote to him to reply to the letter. And I said, okay. And I worked on a draft and typed it up and gave it to him. And he's like, Michael, this is terrible. And I'm like, no kidding. I don't know. I don't know anything about you. I don't know where you live. I think you're married. But anyway, and he also said, I wouldn't type a letter. You have to handwrite it. The whole thing was funny. The whole thing was funny. And he also was really, really nice. I was included in everything the staff did. I got to do some really cool things during that year. I was given assignments that I don't think would ordinarily go to interns. And sometimes we would have policy debates. And I really, really loved that time. And I was kind of out there because my dream was to be a U.S. Senator. That's what I wanted to do when I was in high school. I stayed on for another semester at Georgetown. I had a really vibrant and interesting time in Washington, D.C. And in Washington, D.C. in 1987 was a really difficult place to live, especially for me. I did not have a lot of money, and I lived on 4th Street Southwest near the Freedom of Information building in a neighborhood where I saw a lot of difficult things, a lot of people struggling, a lot of violence. It was quite a bit different from what I was used to in Wichita, Kansas, and in Lawrence, Kansas. And at the end of my second semester, I kind of decided, mainly because of money, but also because I couldn't appreciate a significant enough difference between the education I was getting at Kansas and the education I was getting at Georgetown to incur the debt that it would take me to stay there. I have many lovely memories of that time, and I have friends from my time there that I stay in touch with today. So I'm always grateful for that, and that's like a super long intro to what I kind of want to talk to you about. In the last 2 weeks, I've been asked the same question, the same framing, 3 times. And I'm like, this must be a compelling question. It first came up not long after I was here. I gave a poetry reading that was hosted by Friends of the St. Paul Library, not long after Amir Locke had been killed, and I was working on a poem about that, and I wanted to read it to the group. And I read that poem, and I read a poem called America's Loving Me to Death, and I read a poem called Back in Huntington. I read, in short, poems about institutional violence. And the Amir Locke poem is about institutional violence deployed against a black man, lethally. I read America's Loving Me to Death, which is about the history of violence in America deployed in a number of different ways, against houses, against people. And I also read Grinding Down to Prayer, which is about George Floyd. And I thought it was a hard reading. My nature is to welcome in. Difficult things, I think, sometimes can have the effect of pushing people away. But the emotions that were on my heart were too insistent. I couldn't cast them aside. I really wanted to read the poems that felt most urgent in that moment. Years ago, I attended a reading. I haven't forgot the question. I'm going to come back to it. I attended a reading at the Loft by the poet Patricia Smith, and she read 6 extremely hard poems along the same themes to a largely white audience, a packed house. And it was heavy and sad and, frankly, accusatory at times. And then she ended the reading, and we had cake and wine. I thought back on that reading dozens of times since I attended it in 2015, and typically I can't do that. I might go difficult, 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 hopeful. My book is structured. A difficult thing, a hopeful thing. And it's very much in my character and nature and spirit to be that person. But at that Friends reading, I didn't do that. And we got to the Q&A, and a question came in writing in the chat. And the question was, what brought you to Minnesota, and why do you stay? Because it was in writing, I could not tell what the tone was. I didn't know if it was, why do you come here, and if you hate it so much, why don't you get out? Or if it was, I'm just curious. Or if it was, I would love to hear what allows you to persist here in spite of. I couldn't tell at all. So I kind of answered all three. The factual answer, incidentally, I should say, I got asked the question again when I was visiting a class at the University of St. Thomas. And a little bit after that when I was giving a reading at St. Thomas. I'm like, this is a sticky question. And the third time I got asked, I'm like, this is what I'm going to talk about when I return to the church. I moved to Minnesota in 1990 to go to law school at the University of Minnesota. My plan was to go back to Kansas, my home, where my friends, so many friends and family lived, and so quite a few still live. My first winter here, I lived in Dinkytown in a house called the Gamma House, which still exists today. And it's a place where a lot of law students live. I think the time I lived there, we had maybe 16 law students in a large house. I had no car, and I bought the wrong winter coat. And I would walk across the 10th Avenue Bridge to the West Bank, to the law school, over the river, and when we got to the second semester in January and February, the wind, my eyes would start to narrow closed, freezing a little bit. My hair would freeze, my hat. I was so cold, and I was just like, I don't know if I can do it. Like, it's so cold, so cold. At the end of my first year, I went with a group of housemates up to Lake of the Woods. And we were on the lake, fishing and canoeing and camping around there. And Kansas has a lot of beauty, a lot of beautiful places. But they require an ability to see the beauty of the plains in a lot of the ways. And that can be an acquired taste, like Nutella or Vegemite. But there's no denying the beauty of Lake of the Woods or that part of the state. And I was up there canoeing and fishing, and I was literally on the lake, and I remember thinking, I think I'm not going back. I think I'm going to stay here. And the following winter, I had a better coat. And my mom let me have her car because she got another one. The winter after that, I started cross-country skiing, which gave me something to look forward to when it was cold. I've fallen in love here twice. I have a community of friends who are artists and attorneys and a lot of different interesting things. I think our cities are beautiful, somewhat affordable. I recognize that there are a lot of things behind that statement, but I mean comparatively. Easy to get around. We've got good industries here and so many options for culture and entertainment, so many great restaurants. We're kind of in the middle, so it's easy to get anywhere. My wife is here. My mother has moved here. I raised my daughter here. She has a lot of friends here too. Minnesota is my home. I truly believe I could live anywhere in the United States. this is where I choose to live. It's been that way for a really, really long time. When I got done with law school, was the only other time when I thought, if I'm going to go somewhere, now's the time to do it. Where would I go? And this is why I started with Washington, D.C., incidentally. It's a little bit difficult being black in Minnesota right now. It's difficult being black in the Twin Cities right now. I went to Ely a couple times last year, and I met a lot of super cool artist people, and I met a lot of people who seemed to be concerned about my presence among them, which is not something I'm unaccustomed to. We've had a lot going on since Jamar Clark was killed here. Philando Castile, Dante Wright, Amir Locke, and some of these are just additionally sad. 9.5 minutes is a long time. So many people in the world think of Minneapolis now, and if they don't think of Prince, they think of Derek Chauvin. Dante Wright died during George Floyd's trial. That's troubling. Amir Locke died how Breonna Taylor died. Like, after a woman is killed in her home during a no-knock raid, we'd like to think that every police department re-examines its policies. And good departments say, this doesn't feel right. And they change it. So it's troubling. In the black community, a number of places tend to be lifted up as a great place to live if you're black. Dallas, Texas is one of them. Atlanta, Georgia is one of them. And the DMV, the DC, Maryland, Virginia area is one of them. In answering the question, I talked about what brought me to Minnesota, and I said I love it here. This is about what I would craft if I crafted a place where I wanted to live. Dallas is pretty cool, but they don't have lakes like we do. And I'm a lake person, I'm a water person. Atlanta is pretty cool. But it's also got some issues, and the connections to wealth and conspicuous wealth in the black community in Atlanta aren't quite how I would live my life. But also it's a different kind of state in terms of its aesthetics and its offerings, and not quite right for me. When I lived in DC in 1987, most of the people who lived in the city were black. I returned to DC in 2019, and most of the people who live in the city now are white. And most of the black people who lived in DC for a long time now live in Prince George's County, Maryland, because they got priced out of the neighborhoods that they lived in. And I would go to parts of DC where, when I lived there in 1987, the guidance was be careful. And I would see a Restoration Hardware store and a boutique personal fitness place and housing prices that just stagger the imagination. So DC isn't DC anymore. Prince George's County, Maryland is probably pretty cool in a lot of ways. But the second part of my answer was, there really is nowhere, right? The perception is, if Minnesota is bad, if that was the intent behind the question, and in all the cases I don't think it was. I think everyone was asking me, what brought you here, and why do you stay? Like, I'm just curious. There really is no other place. There's problems everywhere. This is not a thing about race. It's a thing about gender, about sexual orientation, about gender identity, about wealth and class, about religion, There are opportunities and needs and work to be done everywhere. I'm not going to move to Texas where they're making trans rights a wedge issue. Actively, by the way, actively working to disenfranchise black voters. I'm not going to move to Georgia. Same thing. The government there is, I think, upfront about its desire to entrench the white advantage. They're openly trying to do that right now. Not even shy about it. I'm not going to move to Florida, where a man started a fight in a movie theater, shot the man he started to fight with, and was acquitted earlier this week. I want to live there. There are opportunities everywhere. There's work to be done everywhere. To the extent that there are opportunities here, to the extent that there is work to be done here, I want to do that. For the longest time, when I heard the saying, when the going gets tough, the tough gets going, I was confounded by it because I thought it meant the tough leave. Call it crossword puzzle thinking or Wordle thinking, where you can only see the question in one way and so you can't answer it, and then all of a sudden you see it in a different way and you're like, oh, the tough stay and get going. They work on it. I actually worked really hard to make it work. I'm like, yeah, sometimes the tough thing to do is walk away. But no, it's to stay and to do the work where the work is wanted, especially if you realize that work is wanted everywhere. I read this morning about Prior Lake High School. So much sadness on my heart to hear that the basketball season was, they just said, we're not gonna finish it because of racism. A couple of years ago, sports were canceled in Minnesota because of the pandemic, and a lot of people said, this is truly awful. What a great and profound loss. And in some respects, I think that they were right. And in other respects, I think, but we've got to be safe and take care of each other and get through this and then return to the things that we were able to do. This one was canceled by racism. Schools saying, we don't want to have the game with you because your students are they're out of control right now. And then teammates turning on teammates, leaving a note in their bag, get off our team, monkey, underlined twice. Here's how I see it. With sadness, with empathy, with desire to make it better, as an opportunity to work, to educate, to be helpful, to listen, to support. I'm devastated for the child who opened her bag and saw that note. I'm devastated for the people who played against Prior Lake High School and heard monkey sounds. I'm devastated for whoever wrote the note and their parents, and their whole family. I'm devastated for the students in the stands making that sound, and their parents, and their teachers, and the students standing next to them not making the sound. They're all young. They didn't pick that up on their own. They found it somewhere. I think it's easier to find lately than it has been. It's become more open, more available, more intentional. And if you're young and you want to fit in, or you want to feel connection to something, it's going to be available to you there. But I was just thinking, how can we help everybody in that situation? Which to me feels like a calling in instead of a pushing out, which doesn't solve anything. It actually tends, I think, to crystallize whatever it is that led to the pushing away. I was trying to think of it this way. If we lived in the area and my daughter went to Prior Lake High School, what would I do? Which I see is preliminarily an easier question than the one I'm on the way to, and I think that I would think seriously about going somewhere else. Mainly because there are other high schools. And while Prior Lake is going through that, it seems like a lot to deal with. And quite frankly, during a pandemic, with all of its stressors, during a war, with all of its stressors, I would probably think, let's take this one off the table and do something different. What would I do if my daughter got the note? How would I respond? What would I do if my daughter wrote the note? How would I respond? I just try, honestly, to inhabit a variety of different perspectives and try to have a sense for the path that different people have traveled and how it has led to them to where they are. My own thought is that it tends to be fear, an expression of fear. We're afraid of worlds as they change. We're afraid of change. We're afraid of something new. I think sometimes when we benefit from conditions and policies and institutions that disadvantage others, we worry that as the population becomes more multicultural, not just that everything will be evened out, but that there will be revenge. There will be retribution instead of equity and justice and restoration, which I think is more likely to be the outcome. So how do we address that fear? What do we do to make a difference for people who are having those challenges? How do we stay in conversation with each other during difficult times when America is, in a way, at war with itself? Books are being banned and burned, and we know kind of which books and who wrote them and what ideas they promote. History is being rewritten in classrooms. Efforts to be more honest in conversation about history are being mislabeled and banned in legislatures. Not in Minnesota, I would point out. We have other things that we're working on here, but not that right now. So work is wanted everywhere. A lot of the things that we struggled with in the past are present with us still today, and there's a lot to do. I want to close by reading a couple of poems. They come from the part of the book that's aspirational. I'm just sharing kind of different ideas. I want to tell you I was raised Catholic. Early on during catechism, I started to struggle with faith. It was a struggle that started, I would say, when I was 14 and ended when I was 26. I tried to hang in there for a long time with Catholicism and with Christianity. What I kind of settled on when I reached 26 is that I am not a Christian, but it is important to me to be Christ-like. I don't have traditional religious faith in that particular way, but the commandments the 10, and the 2 seem to me exceptional guidance for how we should live our lives. I was really grateful to grow up in a home where church was a priority. Priority being the more diplomatic way to say mandate. I think it really helped me a lot, especially when I was young, stay on a better path and make better decisions. For a super long time, I really thought, if I do this particular thing, God will see me, and I wouldn't want God to see me doing that. And now it's, I don't want to do that. But I think that initial step was super important, and I'm really grateful for that. But the first poem I want to read is an ecumenical poem. I wrote it after the mosque was bombed in Minneapolis for a fundraiser that a group of poets put together to raise money, to be part of the people in the community who were saying, we're really sorry that happened, and we would like to help in some small way. So I'll start with that poem. What name for this? Do you hold salt or beads? Wood or wool? Someone else's hand or your own? Do you kneel? Lift one hand high above your head? Or do you shine the light of your palms up toward sky? Do you raise your chin? Close your eyes? Is light returned to you? Do you sit on a floor shoeless? Chant? Do you fold your body gently onto itself, shins to earth, seat to feet, chest to knees? Are you among brothers or sisters? Are you alone sometimes? Do you call it morning light or dawn prayer? Is it the flower offering, or do you ask for daily bread? What do you say at dusk? At night? And what do you seek in supplication? What do you offer? Water or fruit, flowers or incense? Do you give your servant self? To what, may I ask? To what? I rest my sit bones on wood and wool, on leather. My feet touch carpet, pine, metal. I make circles and lines. Sometimes everything reduces to circles and lines. I call this providence. I know that's not the right word. I find this at home, in my kitchen, or at my desk. Sometimes this finds me when I'm on a bicycle surrounded by cars or trees, shoulders low and curved, back arched, my chest deflated and down, and me at work to keep everything round. Sometimes there I hear birds or squirrels chant above me. Other times I feel summoned to spaces magnified in community. What name for this? I feel called. I walk forward to say, this is what I have to offer. one part of my small story. Or this is what I have witnessed. I want you to notice it too. My hands, my grasp. Sometimes they only claim air. Sweet siblings, we're here together either way. What name must we give to the this beyond our words? Doing that thing I do sometimes where I decide I'm going to read something else instead. This is a poem called Dormancy. It's a particular kind of poem in terms of the form of the poem. It's a contrapuntal, which is a poem that's often set in 2 columns. And you can read down for one poem, down for a second poem, and then across for a third one. And this is for my grandmother, Grace Glass. I'll read the epigraph in just a moment, but she was a profoundly religious person her entire life. I'll tell you one of my favorite things about her. We have a family farm in Blaine County, Oklahoma, in Watonga, which was for a time open for settlers and for black people to buy land. And I don't entirely know how someone in my family history bought 160 acres. And we still have it, which blows my mind almost even more. There were a lot of times in the story of my family when selling that would have been really helpful. And there were a lot of times in the history of Oklahoma when dispossessing people of their land, especially Native people, was very common. And how we avoided all that to kind of keep the farm astounds me. And my mother and her sisters own it today, and it sits atop a gigantic bed of oil and natural gas, which has led to a lot of very interesting conversations in our family because they access that oil and natural gas by drilling down vertically, then horizontally, fracturing shale rock. Anyway, when my grandmother was in her 90s, and by the way, she leased the oil rights to Continental Resources sometime in the 70s and received kind of a very small monthly payment to keep the lease active. When my grandmother, who had modest means, but always enough comfortable, never middle class, never poor. As she got into her 90s, she needed to go to an expensive memory care unit, somewhere on the order of $10,000 a month. And about a month before she came off the waiting list to move in there, she started getting dividends, lease payments from Continental Resources that made paying for the memory care not a problem. And about a month after she died, the lease payments went back down. I'll tell you a couple things. My grandmother had 5 children. One died when she was 2, and my mom and her siblings survived. They all went to college. All their kids went to college. Because we had spectacular grandparents, paying for the memory care as a family wasn't going to be an issue. anyway. I have some super complicated thoughts about God. Every once in a while I think about that resource payment is just taken care of. And the timing of it, it's a little hard to think that it's coincidental. Just before she needed it, it was there. And right after she didn't, it wasn't. I don't know. This is for her. Dormancy for Grace class, February 11th, 1916 to November 11th, 2013. Sometimes in winter, I imagine green leaves unfurl on trees underground. Everything's inverted. What shoots above our roots. We know from science this doesn't happen. Trees enter dormancy. Leaves fall off. Change slows. A November afternoon, as we bury my grandmother next to her husband at a cemetery in Wichita, Kansas, we place her in the ground like a seed in a hull. After a vibrant autumn, night grows darker, colder. But instead of decaying, she germinates. Sometimes in winter, I imagine a November afternoon. Green leaves unfurl on trees underground as we bury my grandmother next to her husband. Everything's inverted at a cemetery in Wichita, Kansas. What shoots above our roots. We place her in the ground like a seed in a hull. We know from science this doesn't happen. After a vibrant autumn, trees enter dormancy. Night grows darker, colder. Leaves fall off. Change slows. But instead of decaying, she germinates. Thanks for having me. Thanks for coming. I really appreciate it. I don't know what our time frame is, but I'd love to.
We can take questions.
Yeah, I'd love to talk if you have any